The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome again to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Tony Palmieri. And in this edition of Eye on Oshkosh, we are very pleased to be joined by a gentleman who was here once before, about this same time last year. His name is Bob Zaspel. Bob is a investigator with the Consumer Protection Office. He's located up in the Green Bay office, but he's going to be talking with us and giving you all kinds of information on consumer protection issues, fraud things that are going on, scams that you need to be aware about. And one of the first things that we're going to talk about, and by the way, thank you very much for driving down here tonight and being here. You always give such good information. It's just a pleasure to have you. Yeah. One of the first things that we want to talk about is landlord-tenant issues. You know, this is the time of year when a lot of students in particular have their leases ending because they've just recently graduated from college. And you know, they're going to be moving out, and security deposits have to be returned within a certain amount of time and that kind of thing. Let's talk about the move-out process. Can a renter be there when the move-out inspection is done?
Well, what we recommend is that you request to be there and you ask the landlord to go through the premises with you during the move-out inspection. It's not state law or a requirement, but I would definitely ask the landlord and insist on it. If he refuses and does not want to do that, I would definitely have a witness go through the apartment with you, perhaps do a little videotaping or take a couple pictures to make sure that you're not charged for damage that was never there in the first place.
So they can refuse to let you go through?
Well, they can because it's not required by law. Okay. We highly recommend it. And I think it's a really good thing for both the landlord and the tenant to communicate, and a lot of times the process will go more smoothly.
When you're checking out, what kinds of things do landlords typically look for? I mean, I know what I look for because I am a landlord, but you know, there's certain things that landlords can't charge for. Well, absolutely.
The law doesn't get specific on individual specific items, for example, but what it does say is that the landlord cannot deduct for what would be considered ordinary wear and tear to a premises. They can deduct for tenant waste or neglect. So I mean, obviously if there's major damage to a carpeting, for example, stains, holes, whatever, terrible dirt on the walls, or you know, the place was not cleaned, they can certainly make deductions for that. But ordinary wear and tear, you know, they're not to deduct for it. It is kind of a judgmental thing, and it's a situation where if the landlord does make deductions, the tenant does have some potential recourse.
And if they can sue, and if they're successful, they can collect double damages.
If
correct?
The judge grants it, yes, there is a provision in our state law where double damages can be granted.
One thing real quickly, you mentioned about carpeting, and let's talk about that for a minute, because that's a really confusing issue, I think, for a lot of people, both landlords as well as tenants. Back, I believe it was January 1st of 1999, a different law went into effect. And check me on this, Bob. The law basically says you cannot charge a tenant you can't just write in the lease that they have to have the carpet shampooed. If you're going to make them shampoo the carpet, it has to be on a separate form, and it has to say across the top, non-standard rental provisions, correct?
You're absolutely correct. That was something that used to be put in a lease, and what the law did was it basically made the landlord put that in what was called a separate non-form provision, and it had to be initialed by the tenant. It could not be part of the lease, and therefore, if the carpeting was not professionally cleaned, it isn't something that the landlord could deduct from the security deposit, but would have to go after the tenant in small claims court.
But a landlord can make a resident pay for carpets to be cleaned, but they just have to put it on this separate form.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Bob, does your department get many tenant complaints?
The landlord-tenant complaints, we do a top 10 category every year, and I think they're usually number 3 or number 4 on the list as far as written complaints statewide. What's interesting about that, though, is we also keep track of telephone calls, information seeking types of situations, and landlord-tenant calls are by far number 1 that come into our agency.
What are some of the biggest complaints that they have?
That's my question.
Well, a lot of tenants will call, and I think one of the biggest complaints is the landlord's not fixing the place. He's not making repairs. He's refusing to, come over, look at things, and fix things. The other types of complaints we see are situations where the landlord is attempting to change a provision of a lease, for example, during the lease term, which they really can't do. Get a wide array of complaints. The other one that's really prevalent is people that have deductions to their security deposits made and think that the landlord is being unreasonable.
If someone is having trouble with a landlord, should they start their investigation of it with the Department of Consumer Protection, or should they start somewhere more locally?
Well, it depends. One thing that we do, if a tenant is having difficulty getting a landlord to make repairs, for example, and from the description of the call, it sounds like there's some really serious things wrong. If you're in a city or a village, we highly recommend you first contact your local building inspection office, and they can come out and make an inspection. The cities all have minimum housing codes, minimum housing standards, and if during the course of that inspection the inspector finds that there are code violations, he can demand that the landlord make those repairs, and if he still refuses, he can cite him and have him fined through the municipal court system.
Oh, okay, great, sure.
Security deposit issues. This is another thing where I think a lot of people are confused. I think it is written kind of confusing, so clarify it for us if you would. You have to have the security deposit or an itemized list of what you're deducting for returned within 21 days. But where the confusion comes in, I think, for a lot of folks is, does that 21 days start at the end of the lease term, or say you've got a case where a resident vacates 5 days ahead of when that lease expires. They've paid their rent for the whole month, but they vacate 5 days before the actual term of the lease expires. That 21 days, the way I have always understood it, starts ticking when they vacate the premises. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that is a source of confusion, and it is a very good question. Basically what the law says is that the 21-day period will start after the surrender of the premises. Now, what we interpret the surrender of the premises to be is when they give you the keys back. Now, if they've vacated, let's say 5 days before the end of the lease term, but have not surrendered the keys, we would not consider that to be the start of the 21-day period. But once the keys are given back and the tenant no longer has access to the property, that usually starts the clock ticking.
So it doesn't count either if they just break the lease and bolt.
and
Right?
that happens, unfortunately.
All right. We have a ton of things to talk to you about, Bob. What about home improvement issues, hiring a contractor?
The contractor category, I believe last year on the top 10 was number 7. It's a real problem, and we can't stress enough to people to take your time and do your homework. when you're selecting a home improvement contractor to do a job. Make sure you get 3 or 4 written estimates, shop around, make certain that you ask these contractors for the names of the last 3 or 4 jobs that they completed. Call these people, do your homework. Don't just take for granted that if you take a contractor's name out of the phone book or out of the newspaper or whatever type of advertisement that the person is legitimate. There is not a licensing requirement in the state of Wisconsin for home improvement contractors.
Are we like most states in that sense?
There are quite a few states who have statewide contractor licensing programs. At this very time, we are working with some legislators who want to introduce that. We think that that would be a real positive thing for our department. At the way it works right now, anybody can simply take out an ad and call himself a home improvement contractor, go out, solicit jobs, take down payments, and really have no competency or no skills whatsoever. So it's important that the consumers do their homework, get a number of different estimates, call our office to see if complaints have been filed against a contractor. Check with your local building inspection office. They work with contractors all the time. And definitely make certain that you have a written contract, that you have everything spelled out in that contract, the total price. Very important that you have starting and ending dates in the contract. These are all state law requirements. And in addition to that, once a job starts, make certain that you get documents which are called lien waivers. This is a very important thing for people to know. If you pay a contractor a down payment and he goes out and purchases a bunch of materials for your job and purchases them on credit and does not pay for them, you could be hit with a lien from those suppliers for the cost of those materials. What a lien waiver is, it's a document signed by that supplier basically waiving his right to file a lien. And when will he sign that document? When he's paid. So you want to make sure that if you pay the contractor that he's paying his bills, or it could come back to really haunt you.
But a lien waiver is not a legal requirement.
Yes, it is.
It is a legal requirement.
That is a requirement of state law, and failing to provide them, and if a homeowner all of a sudden gets hit with liens, it's a criminal felony. It's called theft by contractor. It's a very serious, difficult legal entanglement, and that's why I can't stress enough to consumers to do your homework and check things out before you hire one.
I think here in the Oshkosh area, and probably even in Green Bay and throughout the northeast Wisconsin area, I think, certainly there are a number of very reputable contractors, and fortunately we probably don't have a whole lot of things to worry about. But are you saying then that if I hire ABC Contracting, and I'm just making that up, so I hope there's no ABC Contracting out there. But
I think there is.
Is there? Okay. I hire Cheryl's Contracting.
Sure,
Okay,
there you
Cheryl
go.
Hentz's Contracting, and I'm Jane Doe here. Okay, I hire Cheryl Hentz's Contracting, and I pay them for the work that they're going to do. But they haven't paid their bill they buy a bunch of supplies at Menards.
Okay.
And they buy it on credit, on a corporate credit card. They don't pay that bill. First of all, how does Menards know to come back after me? Or how does that work? I mean,
Well, generally when a contractor makes a purchase, let's say they buy a bunch of shingles, they're going to redo your roof. And generally, when they purchase that, they do specify to the supplier where that job is going to be. A lot of times, for example, like with a bunch of shingles, the supplier will deliver it to the job site, but they keep track of which materials are for which individual job. And what happens then is if the supplier is not paid, under Wisconsin state lien law, he has 60 days from the date those materials were delivered to send a letter to the homeowner, which it's called a notice of intent to file a lien, and that makes the homeowner aware that they have not been paid by the general contractor. And after that is done, they can actually place a lien on the home. And it's a very serious situation because a lot of times I've seen home improvement jobs go bad, the work was terrible, it wasn't completed, the homeowner is in shambles, and to make things worse, he gets hit with some liens after the fact.
So how can we be assured that he's paying his bills?
Well, under state law, he has to provide you with lien waivers. So
Okay, all
when
right.
you make partial payments and he purchases materials, he has to have those documents
So
signed.
that's what those things do.
That's the key to
Okay,
it, yes.
all right, okay.
Is a contractor, when you sign a contract agreeing to a price, and then they start the job and discover that it's going to maybe cost more than what's in that contract, what happens at that point?
That's a very good question, and that does occur all
Sure,
the time.
all the time.
Or the homeowner makes changes and the cost goes up.
Yeah.
What the law says is that when these changes are made, the contractor will modify the contract, add additional documentation to it, show the additional cost, and have that signed by the homeowner. And this is really a good thing, and I don't want to just totally beat up on contractors
Sure.
here, because that is, in a sense, a protection for contractors as well. I've had situations where a job began, all of a sudden the homeowner wanted 10 more things done. It was all done verbally with a handshake. The contractor went ahead and did all these additional things and then billed the homeowner after the job was completed, and the homeowner said, well, wait a minute, this was the dollar amount we were talking about here. So, you know, it can work
Work
both
either way.
ways. It's not just the contractors that
Sure.
are doing that.
One thing we see time and time and time again is because we get all these horrible windstorms and rainstorms in recent years, we've had some doozies. We see a lot of transient type home improvement, home repair businesses. Give us some good counsel here on how to protect ourselves from people who come rapping on the door with their little spiel.
Well, you really bring up an interesting point, and that there's two scenarios where that's happening. One is, like you say, a type of disaster, a tornado, a bad hailstorm. We've had a number of them over the years. We call them
Because they're
storm
like-
chasers.
Okay, I was
Yeah.
going to use the word vulture.
Well, that's pretty accurate as well.
Vultures like
But
that.
you'll get these out-of-state people coming in that are just going to prey on people whose houses are maybe in shambles. Maybe they've got some insurance money in their hand, and these people come in and say, you know, boy, I can start tomorrow, and you know, hey, if your roof is totally blown off, I mean, you can't wait a month. What we recommend is that you seek out the advice of your building inspection office. We've actually had a few situations where building inspectors put in more hours and they hired even more people. In the town of Valders a number of years ago, for example, they hired several building inspectors to go out and actually watch the jobs on site, because there was a whole lot of elderly that lived in the rural areas that needed a lot of work done. Definitely keep in touch with our office and make certain that if you hire a contractor, you want to ask him if he's subbing things out. A lot of times these transients will approach a local contractor and say, hey, I want to do some work here, but I want to be your sub. Therefore, the contractor's name is on the contract, and you may not be aware of the out-of-state people. So you have to be really careful. Definitely keep on top of it. Have your building inspector out there keeping an eye on things, and try, if at all possible, to deal with somebody locally. The other issue, and I want to just stress this briefly, is that this is the time of year, the summertime is coming, the blacktoppers are coming up, the barn painters, all the transients that knock on your door and say, hey, I see your shingles are kind of bad. I have some shingles left and I could do that. Or last year we had a number of victims with the blacktopping scam. I got a little bit left over from a job I did down the street, and I'll give you a really good deal. They'll put on the blacktop about 1/8 of an inch. I think the record was dandelions popped through it down near Madison in about a week.
I had someone actually come to my door with that very, so
man.
that's nothing but a scam. I'm glad
Sure.
I turned them away.
Yeah.
And this is the time of year. I think people always, I like to think we do a good job with the transients, but as far as blacktoppers and everything, winter is the best form of consumer protection we have against them, because they're not going to come up here in
Right.
January.
The one other thing about transients, are they required to meet the same state requirements or laws that other contractors are when it comes to certain things being in the contract and lien waivers and that kind of thing?
Absolutely, and
Okay.
especially with transients, written contracts are required when money is paid prior to completion of the work, which is most of the time contractors will require a down payment. But the other time that a contract is required is when the job is solicited by the contractor, and that's precisely what these people are doing. They're knocking on doors, and many of them don't do that, obviously. They don't get, there may be some type of seller's permits required by the cities.
Sure.
They're pretty smart too. They stay in the rural areas where there isn't a lot of permit requirement.
Any kind of home improvement, you've got to have that contract with those things outlined? I mean, what if you're
Absolutely.
buying 2 windows? You're having 2 windows replaced.
Well, it's not a bad idea to have things documented
Okay.
and specify.
So things like that then wouldn't necessarily fall under that contract requirement.
Not if you're not paying till the job is complete. But I might still insist on at least a document saying the brand of the windows, the style, the type. I mean, there's I've seen the most awful situations occur where people tried to do a home improvement contract and it was all verbal. It's a mess.
Yeah.
And I mean, it works both ways too.
Sure.
It can be a mess for the contractor as well.
Sure.
And I just, that's why we have a law, and bottom line is get it in writing.
Okay.
Protects everybody.
Yeah, it does.
Sounds like
It
the
does.
bottom line too is to do your homework, like you said earlier.
Oh, you have to.
You have to.
You have to. I've talked to people and I said, well, why, how did you find this person? Well, I took it out of the newspaper. I took it out of the
Yeah.
phone book. I thought that meant they were
Yeah.
legitimate.
Yeah. Well, people get busy. They've got jobs, they've got kids, and okay, there's someone that looks like they can do
Yeah.
it. Go with the first one,
Yeah.
and it can often turn out to be a disaster.
Yeah.
And the thing to remember is a big home improvement project, it's one of the largest expenditures you make
Absolutely.
as a consumer.
Sure.
And it warrants your time to do research, prior
Absolutely.
to selecting.
What about automobile repair? This is probably legendary for I'll bet there have been some years where that's the top of the list, isn't it?
It's been up there for quite a while. It's actually getting a little better. I think one of the reasons is cars have become so computerized
Yeah.
and so mechanized that you don't see as many of the little corner shops anymore, the mom and pop type auto shops. A lot of them are pretty highly specialized. They're highly trained, and they know the laws. And basically, there's just 2 things consumers need to remember: that when you do go in and order some repairs for your vehicle, they have to present to you what's called a repair order, and that will have a choice of written estimate alternatives. There's 3 choices. The first one says, I want an estimate in writing. The second one says, please call me if the amount will exceed, and they'll put in a dollar amount. The third one will say, I do not want an estimate. Don't sign the third alternative. That's kind of like saying, why don't I just give you a blank check
Yeah.
and you can fill in the
Yeah.
amount because I trust you totally.
Yeah.
Well, on the subject of estimates now, Bob, I mean, this hasn't happened with my mechanic, and I've got one that I trust implicitly, but I have seen this done in different shops where they'll hand you the repair order, and they already have one of those 3 things checked.
They have an X by number 3.
Yes.
Yes.
And they just say, well, I just need your signature here. And if you're not looking real carefully, you just automatically sign it.
When you sign that third estimate alternative, it really waives a lot of your protection under the law, because with signing the first 2, if they find additional things wrong that are going to cost more money, they have to call you, they have to tell you what the additional repairs are, they have to give you a good faith estimate for the cost of the additional repairs and get your approval before they proceed. That's really the main reason this law came into being. Years ago, somebody drop a car off and they'd say it'd be $200, come back Thursday, you come back and the bill's $900. And the guy says, well, I found more things wrong. Can't do that anymore. So a lot of our laws really came into being. We'd look at an industry where there was a lot of problems, contractors, landlords, auto repair, door-to-door selling. And we looked at those industries and decided we needed a law or a rule to clean that industry up because it was harming consumers. And then we have probably about 40 of those that we enforce in different areas.
Do all auto mechanics have to be licensed?
There is some requirements. It depends on what type of repair work that they're going to do. There are some requirements that they have to meet, and there's training that they have to go through. There's not like a general license per se, like something we're seeking with the home improvement contractors, but yeah, there are requirements for certain types of repairs that they're going to do.
It's a little bit more difficult on this issue for a consumer, isn't it, in the sense that we were talking about home improvement. You want to get a new roof, right? One guy comes in, does an estimate, he leaves. Then you bring someone else in, right? But when you bring your car into a garage,
Oh, yeah.
right, and they say transmission is shot, it's not as easy to drive off that garage, is it?
No.
No.
No. And you know, you are at their mercy to
Yeah.
some degree because you why are you there? Because obviously you don't have the expertise to fix
Exactly.
it yourself.
And because you have a problem that
yeah,
in
so
many
what-
cases needs repair right then.
So what do you advise people in a situation like that?
Well, if it's something where they're recommending an extremely expensive repair and you don't feel quite sure about this, you may want to take it to another shop and just get a second estimate before you proceed with something like that. Once in a while, and I'll only want to say once in a while because it costs us a lot of money, but we do take a car which is in perfect condition, certified through the technical college automobile repair program, and we go undercover and we go to different shops.
Well, that's good to hear.
And well, I won't say when, but we do this periodically, and we just see what type of repairs will be recommended. And I'm amazed at some of the things we found. Transmissions were bad. Serpentine belts needed to be repaired, and we're very careful with this to have you know the instructors at the technical college certify that there's nothing wrong with these vehicles before we go out. And we did this about a year ago, and we made an awful lot of people squirm
I'm
with
sure.
it because so you know that's one thing that we try to do, but yes, when you get into the area of what's called unnecessary repairs, it's a real fine line, and especially when you're talking safety issues, and you know if a mechanic tells you, oh my God, you know the transmission's ready to go, or you really need to replace this because it's in a dangerous condition, yeah, it's difficult to drive away maybe. So again, you know, try to, like you said, you know, work with somebody that you trust and that you know.
What if they do a job, you spent a couple of $100, day or two later, the problem seems to reappear. Do they have to redo it at no extra charge? I imagine not.
Well, it kind of depends on you know what the warranty is on the repairs. But in addition to that, in the example you're saying, if the same thing goes wrong a day or two later, I mean, and if you bring it back, a reputable shop is going to make it right and is going to probably repair it for nothing. Where it gets a little difficult is where all of a sudden other things are wrong, and it can be a touchy situation.
Just one last thing on auto
Sure.
repair. Does Wisconsin have, I guess, what would be called a lemon law?
Yes, we do have a lemon law. It only applies to the purchase of new cars, and it's within the first year of the purchase of that vehicle. If you have to bring it into the shop for the same type of repair, and I mean it has to be something serious, not like a wiper blade that's broke off or something, but something serious. If you have to bring it in for the same repair 3 times, or if the vehicle is in the shop cumulatively for 30 days or more during that first year warranty period.
So it's got to be an extremely sour lemon.
Yeah, you may be entitled to a new replacement under the lemon law.
Do you see that very often?
We do at times. It's something that is handled primarily through the Better Business Bureau out of Milwaukee. They have an arbitration program, and I mean some of these can get very, very detailed, and there can be some real disputes over them. But yeah, it does happen, and I have heard of people getting new vehicles out of it, and I mean, that's nothing worse than buying a brand new car.
Oh, yeah.
Having something like that
Oh,
happen.
For sure.
absolutely.
You know, we don't probably see a whole lot of this anymore since the Do Not Call program's gone into effect, but and we can talk about that for a moment too, as far as the success of that program. But is telemarketing still pretty high up on your agency's list of problems for consumers?
Yes, it is, and
Really?
it's taken a few different forms and a few different twists. And you are correct. The Do Not Call program has been a magnificent program. It's been widely accepted, and it's. I think it's cut down probably 80 to 90% of the telemarketing calls that people receive.
Yes.
What we've found, though, is that there's new types of telemarketers springing up, for example, in Canada and overseas, and it's extremely difficult to get at those people. And we see things in the form of lotteries, for example, where they'll call you and say you've won this lottery, and you just have to pay the taxes and a few other costs in order to claim your prize. And I have just been astounded. There are cases in our office of elderly people in particular that have spent $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 waiting for this $3 million lottery check to come their way. And it's just not going to happen. We've got a very good rapport with the Canadian officials now, and we're working with them, but it's very difficult to track these people down, especially when they're out of the country. They're using cell phones. I worked a case with one of the Canadian folks. I gave him some cell phone numbers. He said the phone's probably on the bottom of the St. Lawrence River right now. A lot of them come out of Quebec area, Montreal, and it's just something where I can't stress enough to family members, if you see an elderly relative taking a lot of money out of the bank, for example, you might want to try to keep a handle on that if you can. One lady north of Green Bay spent all her money with this telemarketer thinking she'd won the prize. When she ran out of money, she was actually getting advances on her credit card and maxed her credit card out. And when finally that ran out, she was in tears, and she told the telemarketer, "I don't have any more money." And he took every dime she had. So it's a really bad situation, and it's the Do Not Call program has done a marvelous thing in eliminating a lot of it, but you can't stop it completely.
The one thing I don't understand about the Do Not Call program, Bob, is why is it my responsibility as a consumer to say, I don't want people to call me? I'm sure lots of people just didn't read the article to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Why is the law constructed that way? Why aren't telemarketers just told, don't call anybody, not just these people who were smart enough to log in to the internet?
Well, I think, for one thing, I guess not everybody's on the Do Not Call list, and there are some people, I guess it's your right if you want to talk to telemarketers, you can. And
That's what I live
Well,
for.
I guess some people are looking for companionship, I guess.
basically, what we've found is there's such a change in phone numbers. People move all the time, and that's why we settled on 2 years. And if you sign up for the Do Not Call program, it will last 2 years, and we try to put out press annually reminding people of that. What I try to tell people is just put a note. It takes about 15 seconds to do. Sign up on your birthday every year. You don't have to wait 2 years. Just do it every year. Then you're covered.
Now, the federal one, though, is that longer than 2 years?
That is, I believe, also a 2-year program, but there are some differences with the federal one, and it is not as strong as the state of Wisconsin's Do Not Call program. There was some activity to do away with all the state's programs and just let the federal one be the law for the entire country. But there were some real big differences in it which we didn't like. For example, under the Wisconsin do not call program, if you terminate a relationship with a business, they cannot call you anymore. Under the federal program, they have, I believe it's a year or up to 18 months to continue to call you
Okay.
to win you back, be it a bank or whatever type of business. So there's a number of things that we didn't like about the federal program.
So we live in Wisconsin. Say we have done business with, say it's a credit card that's maybe in Delaware, okay?
Okay.
And I terminate my relationship with that credit card company. Does the out-of-state company have to follow Wisconsin law, or does this law in Wisconsin only apply to Wisconsin businesses dealing with Wisconsin customers?
No, it applies to anybody located in this country who is telemarketing or wanting to telemarket Wisconsin residents.
Okay.
So we have, with the Do Not Call program, telemarketers have to register with our department. They pay an amount each year. It varies depending on how our budget's going, I guess, but which probably isn't too good at the present time. But they pay an amount of money, and quarterly they get a computer disk with all the numbers of the Do Not Call program on it, and it's their responsibility then. There's different programs you can buy, and they utilize that list, and from there, they're forbidden to contact any people that are on that list. They're given a new list quarterly because the Do Not Call list is updated quarterly. So if you call in April, for example, to get on the no call list, you won't really get on it until the end of June. There can be a month or two lag. It's something to be aware of.
What is the, I think the website for the federal program is donotcall.gov. What is how do people contact the state program?
There is two ways to do that. The website is nocall.wisconsin.gov, or you can call this toll-free number, which is 1-866-966-2255, and you can do it over the telephone. It takes about 15 or 20 seconds. All you have to give is your telephone number and your zip code. You don't even have to give your name. We're not trying to put you on another list or anything.
Okay.
Bob, if you're on the Do Not Call list and you suspect that you're getting an inappropriate marketing call, what do you do?
Those are the types of things that we want to hear about, and we do take complaints from people. We have a form that we can give them to try to track these calls, try to find out the number, the name of the person, the name of the company. We've prosecuted, I believe, close to 25 different companies for violations of the no-call program. One was fined excess of $85,000. So we do take it very seriously, and if you are on the Do Not Call program, it's what it says. They're not allowed to call you.
You know, a lot of folks these days use cell phones as their primary phones. I'm finding that more and more, and I'm sure you're finding that too, which I think that eliminates a lot of telemarketing calls. But there's a, I don't want to call it a scam because they're not trying to extort any money out of anyone, but there is this little myth or tall tale going around on the internet where, call, and within X number of days, cell phone numbers are going to be released to telemarketers. Call such and such a number or visit such and such a website and register your cell phone. That has been talked about, but there's been no legislation that I'm aware of that specifically says cell phone numbers are going to be released to telemarketers.
No, that's not correct. And actually, there is some activity now to include cell phone numbers within the Do Not Call program. In addition to that, another problem that we're trying to deal with right now, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, is unsolicited faxes. You've probably seen those things come over where you can go to Cancun for $399 for a week. And we're dealing with a number of companies right now. A lot of this is coming out of Florida. And again, we're considering expanding the no-call program not only to cellular phone numbers, but also to fax machines, because this has become a bigger problem.
But you can just go ahead and list your if you're visiting either this website for the state or the federal one, you can just automatically list your cell phone number and have it be included, can't you?
You can, and that's something that people should be aware of, that the computer system we have in place to compile these phone numbers, it cannot take a number and kick it out because it's a cell number or even a business number. Businesses aren't supposed to be on it either. You can register any phone number and it will be included. The law says you're not supposed to, but the technology isn't there, and there are cellular phone numbers and business phone numbers on the no-call list.
All right, what can you tell us about home solicitation? I imagine as the weather gets warmer, we'll probably be getting more home solicitations.
Absolutely. We talked about the home improvement transients, which is a part of that, but we've got some other things that are happening. We're going to get magazine salespeople coming, for example. I think we all remember that terrible accident down in Janesville several years ago, and those kids were 16, 17 years old. People need to be aware right now they're going to get bombarded. Magazine sales are big. People selling this cleaner for $50 a bottle, and you can dilute it 1,000,000 to 1, and it'll still take oil off the driveway, and you can drink it, and it won't hurt you. It's a good sales pitch.
Yeah.
And all sorts of things of this nature will be canvassing neighborhoods, and we work very hard with the cities. They need to get seller's permits through the clerk's offices. Many of the city clerks will contact our office when they get an application for a seller's permit if it's something that looks a little suspicious, and we will work with them because we'd rather stop them before they get into our state than to try to pick up the pieces after. And we've been pretty successful with that. Then again, there are the real bad ones that aren't going to go get those permits, to start with. And those are the ones that, we work very closely with local law enforcement. They can literally arrest solicitors on the spot if they don't have a seller's permit issued by their city. It's a municipal ordinance, it's a municipal requirement, and there are fines that can go along with it, and we've utilized that approach quite successfully because it's very hard to prosecute these people in other forms because the second you let them go, they're gone. So, but it's a situation where people have to really be aware. If you do get a knock on your door, I always recommend don't deal with any door-to-door salespeople, but if you do talk to one of them, the first thing you should ask is, can I see your seller's permit from the city? And if they don't have one, that should definitely send up a warning flag.
What is the direct marketing rule?
The direct marketing rule is another one of those laws that I talked about, and it was really strengthened several years ago. It covers door-to-door selling, it covers telephone solicitation, and it covers mail solicitation, things you get in the mail. And what this law did was bring about a lot of disclosure requirements for people that are doing telemarketing or sending you stuff in the mail or knocking on your door. And one of the basic requirements that is in that law, which is very important, is after the initial greeting, you basically need to tell the consumer who you are, and what you're selling. I mean, we've all had that pitch where, congratulations, you've won this prize and I want to come over and give it to you, or you've won a free cleaning in your house,
Right.
and then we want to...
I want to sell you a vacuum cleaner.
Exactly.
So the bait and switch, right? So the law makes bait and switch illegal?
Absolutely. In this type of situation, if you're selling something, you have to tell the person up front what it is you're selling. And I've had arguments with these people. It's like, no, you're not in business to give away this free gift. You're in business to sell the product. So tell the people what your true intent is. And there's a lot of disclosures which are required, which we can really utilize against people that don't. And obviously, they don't want to make those disclosures because they won't get their foot in the door.
Sure.
We had a frozen meat sales people up in the Green Bay area a few years ago, and they actually put an ad on. This was in the middle of summer. It was 85 degrees. They put an ad on the radio that the freezer unit broke down on their truck, and they were at the corner of such and such an intersection, and the meat was thawing out, and he was practically giving it away. And we got out there, and he was selling boxes of frozen meat. Number one, I'd never buy frozen meat from a stranger because there's a safety issue there. But number two, when we calculated it out in a price per pound, it was about $9 or $10 a pound, and half of it was hamburger. Oh. And so, there's always come-ons, there's always a free gift, there's always something of this nature. Or in the case of the meat peddler, they're going to project that they had some misfortune, and they're going to turn that into your good fortune.
Yeah.
We ordered too much, and the boss said get rid of it, or the truck broke down, or the stuff got damaged, and it doesn't work that way.
If someone has a no soliciting sign on their house, on the front door, does that mean everyone has to stay away?
Absolutely.
What about, this is a little self-serving question here.
Sure.
What about political candidates? Lots of political candidates go door to door, and I was running for office last year, and when I did door to door campaigning, I stayed away from the houses with no soliciting. Legally, does even a political candidate have to stay away?
I don't believe that they do, although you may be wise to
do
so, because you're probably not going to get their vote if you're not going to.
Right, exactly.
But
can't you read?
For example, in with the no call program, political surveys and things of that nature are exempt. A lot of people weren't happy about that, but they're not subject to the do not call program. So I don't believe
they're not selling anything. I
Right.
guess.
Oh yeah, of
Right.
course.
But they're, and charitable contributions, which can be somewhat questionable at times, they're exempt as well.
One last thing on this, Bob. What about, obviously there are legitimate salespeople who go door to door. They've got all the permits. They're open. Is there any protection for them if they're treated in a overtly rude, hostile manner? Is that just that's just like part of the trade? I mean, you deal with that?
Kind of goes with the job. I mean, obviously, if somebody was physically abused or something, they would have some recourse.
I mean, what if like someone like threatened to like sick their dog on a person? Is a homeowner allowed to make a threat to that? If you don't,
no.
Okay.
Absolutely not. I mean, the homeowner has the right to ask you to leave.
Okay.
But
not to threaten violence against you.
No, absolutely not.
That does happen.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm sure. I'm sure. In the state of Wisconsin, you've got consumers have 72 hours or 3 days in which to cancel or rescind a sale. But there are some provisos with that. It's not if you walk into a place and say that you want to buy such and such that you can then rescind that sale within 3 days. It's when someone approaches you, correct?
Absolutely. There's a couple provisions there. Number one, the transaction has to be initiated by the seller, which is probably the knock on the door, and the transaction has to take place away from the seller's regular place of business, which is more than likely your home. It was interesting, I know quite a few years ago, they don't do this anymore, but you'd have some of these car lots that would maybe put a bunch of cars, they used to do it in the Lambeau Field parking lot, but maybe by the Oshkosh football stadium, and people would go there, they'd have a one-day sale. They would literally drive the people back to the car dealership to sign the papers and finalize the agreement. Otherwise, they would have been subject to the 3-day right to cancel. So yeah, it's very specific. It has to be really something where the seller approaches you.
Okay. Mail solicitation. There's another one. I get so many of these things on a monthly basis where you've won such and such. All you have to do is do this to collect your prize. Talk to us about that. What's how many of these things? I'm sure most of them are scams.
Absolutely. The first thing that comes to mind when you bring that up is I always like to ask a question of groups I speak to, and that question is, how many of you, if you go to like a trade show or a home and garden show or even walk through a major mall, and you'll see a little booth there usually isn't anybody there, and there's a box there and it says enter to win a prize, a car, a vacation, or whatever. My question to people is, how many of you put your names in those boxes? And maybe half the group will raise their hands. And I usually like to tell those people, don't call our office and complain because you get a bunch of stuff in the mail, because you just put yourself on another 10 or 15 mailing lists. And if you buy something from one of those folks, oh my God, then you get put on, then you're special. You're put on some other types of lists as well. But yeah, the mail solicitation is especially with the no-call program going into effect, we've seen more mail solicitation.
Sure.
It is more costly for the businesses, but yeah, there's a lot of that going on. It's contests. I think you all remember a few years ago we did take legal action against Publishers Clearinghouse. Their sweepstakes solicitations were very misleading. And there again, I recall interviewing elderly that bought something every time they came. And the thing is, if you buy something every time they come, guess what? You start getting them more and more often. One elderly lady I interviewed was getting 2 or 3 a week from Publishers Clearinghouse, and then other contests as well. And she'd spent $30,000, $40,000 on tapes and magazines and trinkets and other things. And when I interviewed her, she looked me right in the eye and she said, "I'm that close to winning the grand prize." So it was very sad. It was very misleading. And you and I get them every 6 months from Publishers Clearinghouse, and you know, if you want to put a stamp on it, fine. You're not going to win anything. But where the real problems occurred is the mailings that people got after they were frequently really involved with these things. They were very misleading. It would come right out and say, "You have won." And I was hard pressed several times to find the print this big where it said, "If these numbers match." And if you're 80 years old, you're not going to see that.
See it. Bob, our laws haven't caught up with the internet yet, have they? Because spam is kind of like electronic junk mail, correct?
That is an area that needs a lot of work.
A lot of work. Do you have any sense? Does your office get complaints about internet scams?
We do get into a lot of internet scams. A lot of times we need to rely on the Federal Trade Commission because it's always out-of-state people, and it's a difficult thing for us to deal with. We work with the Federal Trade Commission, and the other thing we do is band together and work with a number of states all at one time. We need to coordinate. We have different groups set up where we have periodic conference calls with like 15 or 20 different states, and we coordinate investigations because it is very difficult to stop some of these things. I did an investigation on something like that where somebody was using eBay to auction off the rights to their Packer tickets. And number one, they were in North Carolina. They didn't even have Packer tickets. And number two, you can't sell the rights to your tickets. Only the Packers can do that. You have to turn them in, and we stopped this guy before any damage was done. But there's all sorts of problems with that. Instant messaging is another thing where people can pop right into a chat room and try to sell you something, and you can't track down who it is. It's really a whole new world out there, and it's a lot of let the buyer beware at this
By the way,
point.
on Packer tickets, people really need to be careful. I was reading in the paper today that there are at least 20 websites claiming to sell Packer tickets, and most of them are scams.
Yeah.
People are losing hundreds of dollars.
We got involved with another one that had a website, and they were using the Lambeau Field Stadium emblem, the Packer name, the emblem, and that's all illegal. You cannot use any of that. That's all trademarks of the Packers. And some of the victims, they looked at that website and they said to me, you know, I thought we were dealing with the Packers.
Of course.
And so you with something like that, you have to be so careful. And that was a nightmare because a number of these victims came from out of state. They'd purchased airline tickets, took vacation, had hotel rooms booked, got in the parking lot at Lambeau Field and didn't have any tickets. So that's a real disaster, and people need to be so careful.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I want to stay on this for just a moment, if I could, Bob, because, you know, I get, and I've talked to a number of people, we get so many different kinds of emails for Viagra, penis enlargements. I don't care which one of these I happen to click on. I'm a female, and a penis isn't going to grow no matter what ad I go to. So here's the thing. What can you do? Because the Federal Trade Commission, they're concerned about the ones who are sending out millions and millions of these emails a day. What can you do if you're getting maybe 20 or 30 emails a day that are completely unsolicited and it's the same stuff over and over and over again? What do we do?
I guess the two things. Number one, there is new technology within your computer setup to try to eliminate more and more of that. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but that's one area, and I do know that the FTC doesn't obviously go after every one of these, but they do have a site, and they have a Consumer Sentinel. It's a national network of complaints, and you need to file with the Federal Trade Commission, and if enough people do, they will take notice. They're starting to go after these types of things, but it's fairly new yet, and unfortunately the regulation and the protection comes after the scams have already been out there, and it's difficult at times.
We are down to about a minute and a half here. Tell us real briefly what it is that your department specifically does. What's the role of your department, and how can folks contact you?
Well, we are the investigative arm of the Consumer Protection Office for the state of Wisconsin. We have several different functions. We are an agency where you can call and get advice on any consumer issue that you have. You can file a written complaint with us if you've had any type of problem with a business. And through these complaints and through some other means, another function is investigation and referring cases either to the Attorney General or district attorneys for prosecution. A lot of the function comes down to mediation, though, and we will resolve a lot of complaints between the buyer and the seller. And we can also give you advice, tell you if there have been complaints filed. As we said in the beginning of the show, if you're thinking of having a major home improvement job done, contact our office if you've got 3 or 4 contractors in mind, because we can tell you if there have been complaints filed against them.
Okay. How do folks reach you?
We have a toll-free number, which is 1-800-422-7128, and we have regional offices in Madison, Milwaukee, and Green Bay. And for people outside those areas, contact the toll-free number, and if you'd like, you'll get put into a prompt, and you can actually be connected with one of those regional offices and take the one nearest you, which for Oshkosh is the Green Bay office.
Okay, very good. And we've been putting the website address up on the screen throughout the show. So, Bob, thank you so much. It is always so nice to have you here, and you always give such good advice. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thanks to Tony. Thanks, of course, to you for joining us and letting us into your home. We'll see you next time. Until then, take care and keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.